To introduce our congressman, my friend, Steve King.
Thanks very much. I appreciate the introduction. I appreciate Sam. Professor Close to me, Sam to the rest of you. And he brings a constitutional and an economic perspective that when I bounce it off of Sam, when it comes back and it's in tune, it's been tested well. And so when we need that, we're a country that we watch ourselves sometimes migrate away from the underpinnings that made this a great country. And we're watching the dependency class in America be expanded over and over again. Obamacare does that. It's the thing that it does worse than any other part, is that it takes away our independence. It takes away our ability to manage our own health care. And I have put it this way, that the federal government hasn't figured out yet how to nationalize your soul. They haven't figured that out yet, but they figured out how to nationalize your body, how to take over your skin and everything inside it and decide what you're going to do, what health insurance policy you can buy, in fact, what health insurance policy you shall buy. And that has never happened before in the history of this country. That was the argument before the Supreme Court this past week. And I did have the great privilege of being seated in the Supreme Court and a great vantage point to listen to the oral arguments before the court. And I want to express my public gratitude to Chief Justice Roberts, who apparently recognized the work I've done to repeal Obamacare and the constitutional arguments that I have continually made against it. And he saw fit to make sure that I had a seat in that court. And now, when you go to a ball game, there's a part of the ball game that's known as the cheap seats. Well, there was no such thing as a cheap seat in the Supreme Court. It was the most hotly contested seat any place in the country for those days. But instead of being in any seats, I wasn't in the cheap seats, I was in the chief's seat. And I didn't know that till I walked in. He made sure I was sitting right there at front. I had the best vantage point in the entire courtroom from where I sat to see the whole picture. And listen, I've got a jacket pocket full of notes that I took, and of course now the audio was available about 3 hours afterwards. And I'm going to just give you the handicap. Everybody wants to know what's going to happen. No one knows, and I don't presume to be able to predict what the Supreme Court will do, except I'll go out on the limb because I can be right or I can be wrong, and I'm just speculating. Listening and the oral arguments on the individual mandate, I've long argued that it's a violation of the Commerce Clause. The Commerce Clause in the Constitution is one of the enumerated powers that says that Congress has the authority to regulate interstate commerce. So that would mean that the federal government could decide whether Rainey quit smoking, I don't know, whether he could drive across into Nebraska and buy a pack of cigarettes or not. Congress would have the authority to regulate that. That's interstate commerce if you're selling it across state lines. But if it's something within the state themselves, they do not. Now, that's been stretched some over time, and there's different interpretations of it. But in the end, is let's say, buying a health insurance policy within a state or going to a doctor or in a medical clinic within a state, is that an act of interstate commerce? I would say no. Many would say yes. And they say that if you don't participate in health care, you are still at an act of interstate commerce because eventually somebody's going to pick you up in an ambulance and take you to the hospital and the rest of us will have to pay. That's their argument. That's the interstate commerce argument, that even non-participation in a healthcare economy is participation. That's a little hard to get to that point, but if you go back and read Orwell, then you can understand it a little bit better, I think. And I have argued that in every decade, in every state, there have always been babies that were born, lived, some of them a long, healthy life, and died without going to the doctor, without engaging in any kind of health care, let alone interstate commerce. So I think that it's a vast stretch of the Commerce Clause in the Constitution to argue that non-participation in a system that they argue is so now infused by government dollars that it can't be separated. The government can take over a sector of the economy and they can require you to participate in it then and call it, because of the interstate commerce provision, the Commerce Clause in the Constitution. That's the major question between the court. Think about flood insurance. We know about floods in this community. And the federal government took over flood insurance back in the 60s, and now they do not compel you to buy it. And that's a distinction this is a compulsion to bind policy. I think they will have to find it unconstitutional on those grounds because it violates the Commerce Clause. And I predict there will be a 5-4 vote that will be unconstitutional. I said I'd make a prediction. Then, but if the Supreme Court finds the Commerce Clause to be constitutional, then the Commerce Clause itself swallows up almost all the other enumerated powers in the Constitution. It swallows up the 9th and the 10th Amendment, and it eliminates limited government as the reason and the provision that are for the provisions in the Constitution itself. This is a huge constitutional decision before the Supreme Court, and it will be, I believe, the most significant decision since Roe versus Wade in 1973. That's what we're looking at, and I'm very grateful that I've had the opportunity to listen to those arguments before the court, and it's a fascinating thing anytime you go in there. Oh, and an interesting little aside, several years ago I went to hear the oral arguments before the Supreme Court on the Ten Commandments, whether they could be posted in Kentucky or Texas. There were 2 cases before the court. And I walked up to the Supreme Court doors, and it was a very bright day outside, very sunny. My pupils were contracted because of the bright light, and I opened the door in the Supreme Court, and as soon as I did, it opened in front of me, and an individual was standing there, and all I could see was the white shirt that he had on. I couldn't see the rest of him. And I said, "I'm Congressman Steve King. I'm here to hear the oral arguments on the Ten Commandments before the court." And his answer was, "I'm Moses, and I'm here to lead you." And that's his name, Moses. And Moses let me in, he let me out that day, and who's there to greet me last week? Moses himself. And so I have to send him a copy of the article that I wrote the last time about Moses leading me in and leading me out. But he was really pleased that I had written an article about that. He didn't know that. In any case, Obamacare is a very important piece of this race. And if I'm going to lay out 2 planks of this campaign going forward, it is plank number 1, repeal Obamacare. I have worked against Obamacare for the last 2.5 years. And over the last year, I shifted my efforts from the repeal, where I had the first repeal draft to repeal all of Obamacare. I pushed the discharge petition in the summer, that summer, and we got 173 signatures on it. Heritage Action had published that they thought, at least they told me that, I'm not sure if it's published now that I think of it, that 7 to 8 congressional seats in America turned because of the discharge petition alone. Because you could then hold people accountable. If you don't sign the discharge petition, don't tell me you're for the repeal of Obamacare. And so through that, and I brought the amendment to cut off all funding to Obamacare. Didn't succeed in getting that passed on a procedural ruling. And then, though my language passed the House and to repeal Obamacare, and I think it was 242 votes in favor. That's my guess. And the Senate, it failed in the Senate, but all 47 Republicans voted for that repeal language over there. Then I turned my attention to the presidential race here in Iowa, and it concluded that as an Iowan, I have more to say about who will be the next president than anybody from any other state, or on average. You too. All Iowans had then more to say about who would be the next president on a per capita basis than anybody in the country. And so I brought as much leverage as I could to the presidential race and worked to establish that plank number 1 would be repeal of Obamacare. And I wrote a pledge for the presidential candidates, a repeal Obamacare pledge, and that pledge has been supported by every Republican presidential candidate. And so that's where I put a lot of my efforts, and I think it is the number 1 plank in the platform of every candidate, every Republican candidate for president. And then the next piece, priority plank number 2, isn't as far along as it needs to be, and it needs to be elevated, and that is to pass a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. And I say this because in the United States Congress today, the will to balance the budget does not exist. It's there among individuals, but it's not there in large enough numbers to pass an amendment with a 2/3 majority out of the House and then out of the Senate to send that constitutional amendment for a balanced budget to the states for ratification. We need a president who runs on it, a president who calls for a mandate from the American people, who will stand up consistently and say, if you elect me as President of the United States, I'm impersonating a presidential candidate, you see, then I will push for a balanced budget amendment with all of the leverage of the bully pulpit of the President of the United States. Those two things, if we can get those things accomplished in this presidential election, we will have cleared away and laid the groundwork for us to do a lot of positive things. And I've got a lot of ideas to fill the hole, but those things need to be done. And then I want to talk about the first and the highest priority of the local issue here in Sioux City and in the Siouxland area, in this tri-state area, and that is BPI, beef products. It is, there's sometimes in life something comes along that's just so completely unjust that it just rips your heart out to see what they have done, and to think that something that's completely false and specious and has been represented in a dishonest fashion. And I don't know the motives of the people that did this. I don't know them yet. But I do want to look into those motives. It has almost taken down a wonderful business. And the community people of Eldon and Regina Roth have done so much for this community in this area. Over and over again, I show up at some benefit or some event. Who's there? Eldon and or Regina Roth. It hasn't just been that they've been successful business leaders, but they have been philanthropists in this community and way beyond this for the whole nation. And the outpouring of support that we saw here in this city on Saturday was extraordinary. I was looking out there and I was thinking, the last time that I saw an outpouring of support on this parking lot like this was sandbagging. And it's a similar kind of an effort, but if they had all been sandbagging, there wouldn't have been room, because it was jammed and 15,000 burgers were served, and 30,000, or I don't know what the final count was. Earlier in the day, I think I got that number of 12, and I saw AP report 15,000. And that's something. And so I have some of the videos that are edited from that are really useful. I have been on the phone coming last week and then coming forward to this week with the chairman of the House Ag Committee, Frank Lucas, and talking to him about having a congressional hearing so that we can further shine light on a very, very safe, healthy, nutritious beef product, which is BPI's product. And I said there on Saturday that not only is it good and it's safe and it's 100% beef, it's actually an enhancement to ground beef. It's not a downgrade, it's an upgrade to ground beef. And so we've all eaten it for years and never had a concern, and there's nothing in the record that I can see that would cause anybody to do anything other than just put them on the grill. And so I made sure that I had a nice big inventory in my refrigerator going into the weekend, and I made sure that my grandchildren all had a nice squirted away good grilled burger off of BPI's product, and the lean, finely textured beef product, I should say. And so, I think that we're all like that. We want healthy food for all of us. And when you see the assault on it, you have to wonder, what do the vegetarians think of this? Is any of them on that team on the other side? I just asked the question. There's a certain pattern that seems to be at work here. And so I will continue to do what I can. I think we'll, we don't know yet if we can find a date to have a hearing in the right time. I know that Siouxland Chamber comes out on the 18th and 19th of April. I look forward to that. We're scheduling meetings and being prepared for that now. And if we can index something in that would be a good public event to showcase BPI's product, and also the timing of an ag hearing, we'll have to see how that works out. But I want to have a hearing before the entire country that puts into the record how safe this product is, how innovative that the Roths have been in founding BPI. And when you see the video, I looked out from that stage and I saw thousands of people out there, and I thought, if I'm having a hard time making this argument that we should create a place in our Ag Committee schedule for a hearing, this view that I have from there on that stage of all the people that are out there, that's the most powerful argument that you could ever ask for, is the outpouring of support in this community. And so that's where the BPI piece is, and we're going to keep pushing on it. It's now got to go national. You've shown your support. It's not enough to have support in the neighborhood here, but we have to convince the rest of America that you are right. And that's where our effort is going to be, coming out of this congressional office and the full staff that I have around here, and they do a great job. So then the next thing I want to talk about locally, you know what's coming, the river. H.R. 2942 is the legislation that I began to do the research on to write clear back in the first days of June of last year. I have spent my life in doing earthwork, site development work, underground utilities, and we know about grades and flows, and we've done levee work, we've done dredge work, we've worked in the bottoms, we've done river channel work, and so when I watch this, I look at it from a perspective that an engineer would look at it as a contractor, as a citizen, as one who has started a business and watched it get flooded underwater. 4 different projects of mine were underwater in 1993 simultaneously. So when I went up and down this river last summer, it wasn't that I just looked at my first flood and yawned away at what it actually did to people. I've lived it, and I've worked with people that have lived it over and over again. 93, 96, the 2008 floods in Cedar Rapids, Katrina, I went to all those places. I walked the streets, I went into those homes, I cleaned out wet drywall. Seems like an odd oxymoron, doesn't it? And I went into the lower 9th Ward in New Orleans when the Corps of Engineers said it was too dangerous to go there, they wouldn't take me. So I just broke off and went off on my own and went down and walked down there and went into those houses where there would be family members, siblings that were scooping out the mess that they had. They were glad somebody cared. It may have been dangerous and what didn't seem like it to me. They were glad somebody cared. And now we're here watching what happened from Gavin's Point down, and there's plenty of flooding upstream from Gavin's Point too. But from Gavin's Point down where it's controllable, and that discharge went 130, 150, 160,000 cubic feet per second. More water than had come down here before by discharge at least. And we found out what you take here in Sioux City. Some number, 100,000 or so of cubic feet per second coming down through here was, looking back on it, kind of manageable. Absolutely preferable to 160,000 cubic feet per second. And when you go on down the river, from the river became a mile wide, 2 miles wide, by Glencoe 8 miles wide, by 680 it was 11 miles wide. And yet it was a secret flood. 5 to 6 miles wide then from Glenwood on down to Missouri and halfway through Missouri. A secret flood because you couldn't drive through it, you couldn't put a boat on it, and it was hard to cover it with the press. But I want to thank the press for, we put 4 boats out on the water last summer with cameras on them, put a couple cameras up in a plane and flew the floods, so we did capture some of that here locally. But nationally, they never really got the message. And the message is this. The Corps of Engineers will start almost every public hearing with this. They'll show a slide that says, Corps of Engineers, Master Manual, congressionally authorized. They always point to that they're congressionally authorized. That's where they get their authority. Nobody in Congress should ever question who authorized the Corps of Engineers. It was the United States Congress. And it's our job to authorize and reauthorize. And it's our job to define the mission. Now, we don't write the minutia of hydrology. That's for the engineers to do. But we can define their mission. We have. That's the mission that they're carrying out. We need to redefine it now because they have managed this river, the 6 reservoirs upstream, to protect us from serious downstream flooding in the event of the greatest runoff experienced up till that time, which was the 1881 runoff. 2011 eclipsed the 1881 runoff. You would think it would be a gimme for the Corps of Engineers, a no-brainer for the Corps of Engineers to say, now we're going to have to recalculate to protect you from serious downstream flooding. Instead, they said, it's a 500-year event. Well, I've lived through a whole bunch of 500-year events. Lord knows why. But He's the only one that knows what a 500-year event is. Mortals don't. And when you've got 150 years of records and you're declaring a 500-year event, you know that you're out on thin ice. So the bill that I have, H.R. 2942, does this. It just directs the Corps of Engineers to recalculate and adjust the water levels to provide the storage to protect us from serious downstream flooding. There's no new capital being invested in this river bottom because there's no guarantee that the Corps will do all they can do to protect us. You can't be guaranteed that you'll not be flooded, but they can at least say, we are going to recalculate, our 16.3 million acre feet needs to be increased, and we're going to lower some water levels upstream to protect you. And so I'm going to continue to push on that legislation. We're going to do everything we can to get that passed, and if we can, I think you'll see dollars go back into the investment that was from the water level on down. And so then just carrying on here with What else needs to be said? We're going to write a farm bill, perhaps this year. Odds are maybe a little bit less than even that we'll do that, but I'll be very engaged in that. I said on the